I decided to visit my granddaughter at her job as a CEO. At the entrance, there was a sign that said authorized personnel only. When I told the guard I was her grandmother, he laughed and said, "Ma'am, I see her grandmother every day. There she is coming out right now." So, I decided to play along. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought a simple surprise visit would shatter everything I believed about my family. My name is Eleanor, though most folks call me Nana Ellie. I'm 70 years old. And until that Tuesday afternoon, I thought the sun rose and set on my granddaughter, Chloe. It started with a mother's worry, passed on to me. My daughter, Sarah, had been fretting for months. "Chloe's working herself to the bone, Mom," she'd tell me over the phone, her voice tight with that special anxiety only a mother can possess. "She never comes for Sunday dinner anymore. She looks so tired." Chloe was the CEO of Viridian Dynamics, a title that filled me with pride and, I'll admit, a little bit of awe. At just 35, she climbed mountains I couldn't even see from my generation. That day, I'd baked her favorite, my famous lemon lavender shortbread cookies. I wrapped them in a checked cloth, the way I always had when she was a little girl coming to visit after school, and decided a nudge from her Nana was in order. The Viridian Tower was a spear of glass and ambition piercing the city skyline. I'd only been a handful of times. Chloe preferred to visit me in my cozy, cluttered house, saying it was her sanctuary from the corporate world. I pushed through the heavy glass doors, my old bones feeling every bit of their 70 years in this temple of youth and hustle. The lobby was a vast expanse of cold marble and colder steel, a far cry from my warm rug-filled living room. A young security guard, his nameplate reading Ben, sat behind a desk that looked like it belonged on a spaceship. He had a kind face. "Good afternoon, young man," I said, my voice a little shaky. "I'm here to see Chloe Williams. I'm her grandmother, Eleanor." Ben looked up from his screen and his expression did a funny little dance. It went from polite attention to confusion, then to a sort of dawning amusement. He tilted his head, looking at me like I was a puzzle box he couldn't quite open. "You said you're Ms. Williams's grandmother?" he asked, a note of genuine bewilderment in his voice. "Yes, that's right. Eleanor Williams." I held up my cloth-wrapped bundle. "I brought her some cookies." And then he did it. He laughed. Not a mean laugh, but a real from-the-belly laugh of pure confusion that bounced around the sterile lobby. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," he chuckled, shaking his head. "But I see Ms. Williams's grandmother every day. She just stepped out for a moment. There she is now, coming back in." He gestured towards the elevators. I turned, my heart doing a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. A woman was walking through the lobby. She was maybe my age, impeccably dressed in a cream-colored pantsuit, her silver hair cut in a chic modern bob. She carried a designer handbag I knew cost more than my first car. She moved with a polished, confident grace that I, with my slightly arthritic hip, could only admire from a distance. The woman nodded to Ben with a familiar smile. "Forgot my reading glasses, Benjamin. The perils of age." "No problem, Mrs. Albright. She's in her office." Mrs. Albright. The name hit me like a physical blow. My hands clutching the cookie bundle felt numb. The familiar crinkle of the cloth was suddenly a deafening sound in the roaring silence of my own mind. Ben was looking between this Mrs. Albright and me, his friendly face now a mask of pure perplexity. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said to me gently, "but are you sure you're related to Ms. Williams? Because Mrs. Albright here is her grandmother." Is her grandmother. Present tense. Not claims to be. Not acts like. A simple matter-of-fact statement that tore a fissure right through my reality. Mrs. Albright paused, her attention caught by our conversation. When her eyes met mine, I saw it. Not surprise. Not guilt. A flicker of sharp, cold recognition. She knew exactly who I was. "Is everything all right here, Benjamin?" Her voice was smooth, cultured, the voice of a woman who chaired charity galas. Every instinct in my old body screamed to shout, to weep, to demand an explanation. This was my Chloe. My granddaughter who I'd rocked to sleep, whose skin knees I'd kissed, whose college tuition I'd helped pay with my teacher's pension. But 70 years on this earth, most of them spent reading the unspoken language of people, told me to be still, to be smart. "Oh, you must be Margaret," I said, forcing my voice into the gentle, slightly fluttery tone I use when I'm nervous. It wasn't hard to summon. "Chloe's told me so much about you. I'm Eleanor, an old friend of the family from out of town." The lie was like ash in my mouth, but it was a life raft. I was just dropping off some treats for Chloe. Margaret Albright's shoulders lost a fraction of their tension, but her eyes remained as sharp as shards of glass. "Ah yes, Eleanor. Chloe has mentioned you." Had she? What stories had she been told? What lies had filled my absence? "She's in back-to-back meetings, I'm afraid, but I can make sure she gets your package." I handed over the cookies. My hands moved mechanically, as if belonging to someone else. "Just tell her Nana Ellie stopped by." Of course. Her smile was a perfect, polished thing devoid of any real warmth. I walked back to my sensible 10-year-old sedan in a daze. The world outside looked the same. The same cars, the same sky, the same city. But the axis of my life had just tilted into a terrifying new angle. I sat in the driver's seat, the familiar scent of lemon polish and old books in my car now a mockery of the normal life I thought I had. 25 years. 25 years of being her Nana. 25 years of Christmases, birthdays, whispered secrets, and proud graduations. I had a box of every card she'd ever given me. Each one signed "Love, Your Chloe." Had any of it been real? My phone, a simple flip model, buzzed with a text from Sarah, my daughter. "Did you see her? Is she okay?" I stared at the words. How could I tell my daughter that her only child had apparently acquired a new, upgraded grandmother? A grandmother who forgot her reading glasses in a CEO's office, not her knitting on a porch swing. I started the car and drove home, the route I knew by heart now feeling like a path through a foreign land. My house, when I pulled into the driveway, looked the same. The white clapboard we'd bought when Sarah was just a girl. The rose bushes my late husband, Thomas, had planted for me our 10th anniversary. The welcome mat that literally said, "Welcome." Everything was in its place, and yet nothing was where it belonged anymore. Inside, the silence was different. It wasn't the peaceful, companionable quiet of a well-lived-in home. It was the hollow silence of a stage set after the actors have left. I walked through the rooms, my eyes tracing over the gallery of family photos that covered the walls. Chloe as a gap-toothed 7-year-old on my lap. Chloe in her cap and gown at high school graduation, her arms slung around me. Chloe and me just last year at the beach, our smiles wide and real. Or so I had believed. I made myself a cup of tea, the ritual steadying my trembling hands. I sat in my favorite armchair, the one by the window where I did my knitting, and I stared out at the garden Thomas and I had nurtured for 40 years. My mind kept replaying the scene in the lobby, searching for a different explanation, a kinder one. But the cold, hard truth was the only one that fit. My granddaughter, my Chloe, was living a life I knew nothing about, and in that life I had been replaced. The front door opened around 6. It was Sarah coming to check on me after work. "Mom? How did it go?" she called out, her voice echoing through the hall. She appeared in the doorway to the living room, her coat still on, her face eager for news about her daughter. I looked at my own daughter, her face so like my own at her age, and I wondered how I could possibly tell her that the foundation of our family, the one we had built with love and sacrifice, was nothing but a carefully constructed lie. "It was enlightening, dear," I said, my voice barely a whisper. And as I took a sip of my tea, now gone cold, I knew that my quiet life as Nana Ellie was over. A storm was coming, and I, a 70-year-old woman with a heart full of broken china, was the only one who could see the clouds. Continue writing chapters up to 20, of course. Here are the next chapters of the story, continuing from where we left off with Nana Ellie. Chapter 2. The unraveling thread. Sarah stayed for dinner. I moved around my kitchen, a space I'd commanded for 40 years, feeling like a ghost in my own home. My hands, usually so sure when chopping vegetables or kneading dough, felt clumsy. I'd promised Thomas on his deathbed that I'd look after our girls. How could I have failed so spectacularly? You're quiet, Mom, Sarah said, sipping the chicken soup I'd made. Was Chloe rude? She's been so stressed lately. No, dear. She wasn't there. The lie came easily, a protective blanket I was weaving to shield my daughter for now. I left the cookies with her assistant. The word assistant tasted bitter. Margaret Albright was no assistant. She was a usurper. Oh. Sarah's face fell. I was hoping you could talk some sense into her. She canceled on us again this Sunday. Said she's flying to a strategic retreat in Aspen. Aspen. The word sent a cold shiver down my spine. Just last week, Chloe had told me she was swamped with a local project and couldn't even manage a phone call. I told her not to worry, to focus on her work. I'd been so understanding. So foolish. After Sarah left, the silence of the house pressed in on me. I went to the hallway to the wall of memories. I traced the face of my granddaughter in a photo from her college graduation. Her smile was brilliant, her arm tight around my waist. Who were you smiling at, Chloe? I wondered now. Was it even for me? My eyes fell on a more recent picture, taken just 6 months ago at my birthday party. Chloe was beside me, her cheek pressed against mine. We looked so happy. But now I scrutinized her eyes. Was there a distance there? A shadow I'd been too blind, too loving to see? The phone rang, startling me. The caller ID lit up with Chloe's name. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, frightened bird. Nana! Her voice was bright, effervescent. The sound that had always been a balm to my soul now felt like a shard of glass. Ben at the front desk told me you stopped by. You should have called. I would have cleared my schedule. Ben told her. So she knew I'd been there. She knew I'd met Margaret. And she was carrying on as if everything was normal. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. Oh, it was no trouble, my dear, I said, my voice the picture of gentle grandmotherly affection. It was the performance of my life. I was in the neighborhood. Just wanted to bring you some cookies. That was so sweet of you. Margaret gave them to me. They're delicious as always. Margaret. She said the name so casually, so familiarly. There was no hesitation, no explanation. Who is Margaret, Chloe? Why does the security guard think she's your grandmother? The question screamed in my mind, but I kept my voice light. I'm glad you liked them, sweetheart. Your mother said you're off to Aspen this weekend. A pause. A beat too long. Yes, just a quick trip. Some potential investors. You know how it is. I suppose I don't really, I said, and I let a little of my true feeling, the hurt, the confusion, tinge my voice. Just a drop. A test. Her voice softened, adopting the slightly patronizing tone she sometimes used when explaining her complex world to her simple old Nana. It's just a lot of boring meetings, Nana. I'd much rather be at your house eating your cooking. The lie was so smooth, so perfectly crafted to make me feel cherished and placated. And for 25 years it had worked. But not anymore. We chatted for a few more minutes. About the weather, about a book I was reading. It was all so normal. It was also horribly, terrifyingly wrong. When we hung up, I felt a profound exhaustion, deeper than any physical tiredness I'd ever known. I had just spoken to my granddaughter, and I had been talking to a stranger. Chapter 3. The detective in the knitting basket. The next morning, I woke with a resolve that surprised me. Thomas always said I had a spine of Sheffield steel beneath my soft exterior. It was time to prove him right. I wasn't a vengeful woman, but I was a thorough one. A life spent as a school librarian had taught me how to research, how to follow a trail of clues. I started with what I knew: Margaret Albright. The name was distinctive. I booted up the desktop computer Sarah had bought me, the one I mostly use for email and looking at pictures of cats. My fingers, more accustomed to turning the pages of a book, stumbled over the keys. Took less than an hour. Margaret Albright was a society page staple. Widowed. Old money. A prominent donor to the arts and, notably, a board member of the Viridian Dynamics Foundation, the company's charitable arm. She wasn't just a random woman. She was deeply enmeshed in Chloe's professional world. Next, I looked at the company itself. Viridian Dynamics. I'd always been so proud of it, but I'd never really looked at it. I found news articles, press releases. And there, in a photo from a gala a year ago, was Chloe. And on her arm, beaming with the pride that should have been mine, was Margaret Albright. The caption read, CEO Chloe Williams with her grandmother and esteemed board member, Margaret Albright. The words blurred on the screen. Her grandmother. It was there in black and white for the whole world to see. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a sharp, clutching ache. How long had this been going on? A year? More? I thought of the gifts Chloe had given me recently. Expensive gifts. A cashmere shawl, a fancy food processor I never used. She'd said they were because she loved me, because she was so grateful for me. Now I wondered if they were guilt offerings, payments for my silence in a narrative I didn't even know I was part of. I needed harder evidence. I wasn't ready to confront Sarah, but I needed an ally, someone who could see what I couldn't. I called the one person I trusted completely. Arthur? It's Ellie. Arthur was my late husband's oldest friend, a retired private investigator. He was a gruff, kind man who had always had a soft spot for me. Ellie, to what do I owe the pleasure? Need me to come over and fix that leaky faucet? No, Arthur. I need you to do some digging for me. About Chloe. The line went quiet. Is she in some kind of trouble? I don't know, I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. But I think I might be. Chapter 4. The web widens. Arthur came over that afternoon. I showed him the article, told him about my visit to Viridian, about Margaret. He listened, his kind, wrinkled face growing more and more grim. This doesn't sound right, Ellie, he said finally. Not our Chloe. That's what I thought, Arthur. But that woman, the security guard, it's all there. He agreed to help. His methods were more direct than mine. Over the next few days, he did what he called discreet surveillance. He followed Chloe. He followed Margaret. The picture he painted for me was more devastating than I could have imagined. He confirmed the Aspen trip. But Chloe wasn't alone. Margaret Albright was with her. They flew first class together. Arthur, using his old contacts, even managed to get a photo of them from the airport. They were laughing, their heads close together. Chloe was carrying Margaret's carry-on for her. It's more than just a professional relationship, Ellie, Arthur said gently, placing the grainy photo on my kitchen table. They looked close. He'd also dug into Margaret's finances. It seemed the gifts worked both ways. Margaret had recently paid off the mortgage on a multi-million-dollar penthouse apartment in Chloe's name. An apartment I had never set foot in. Chloe had always told me she was renting a modest place near work to save money. Why Arthur? I asked, my voice small. Why would she do this? Why would she replace her own family? Arthur sighed, a heavy, weary sound. From what I've seen in my line of work, it's usually about two things, money or status. Sometimes both. This Albright woman, she's connected. Powerful. In Chloe's world, that might be worth more than sentiment. The word sentiment felt like a synonym for love. And in Chloe's new world, love, it seemed, was a currency that had been severely devalued. Chapter 5. The key, the final undeniable proof, came from an unexpected place. My own home. I was doing my spring cleaning, a ritual Thomas had always teased me about. I decided to tackle the spare room, the one we still called Chloe's room, though she hadn't slept in it for years. I was dusting the top shelf of the closet when my hand brushed against a small, cold metal object. It was a key. It was attached to a simple key fob with the logo, The Residences at Crestview. It was a fancy name, one I'd seen in the society pages. A luxury apartment building. My blood ran cold. This wasn't the key to her modest rented place. This was the key to the penthouse Margaret had bought her. I held the key in my palm, its cold weight feeling like a verdict. She had left this here. A spare? A forgotten token from her old life? It didn't matter. It was an invitation. A terrible, heartbreaking invitation to see the truth. I called Arthur. I have a key, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. To her apartment. Ellie, I don't think that's a good idea, he cautioned. You don't know what you'll find. I know exactly what I'll find, Arthur, I replied, the steel in my spine finally making its way to my voice. I'm going to find out who my granddaughter really is. Chapter 6. The other life 2 days later, with Arthur acting as a nervous lookout in the lobby, I used the key. It turned smoothly in the lock of apartment 22A. The door opened onto a world of stark, minimalist luxury. It was the polar opposite of my warm, cluttered house. Everything was shades of white and gray. There were floor-to-ceiling windows with a breathtaking view of the city, a view that felt cold and impersonal. There were no family photos. Not of me, not of Sarah, not of Thomas. There were, however, photos of Chloe and Margaret. On the mantelpiece, in elegant silver frames, they smiled from a sailboat, from a ski slope at a black tie event. In every picture, they looked like the perfect, sophisticated duo. I moved through the rooms like a ghost. The kitchen was pristine, untouched. The bedroom closet was a curated collection of designer clothes, all with tags I couldn't afford to look at. But it was the second bedroom, set up as a home office, that held the deepest betrayal. On the desk was a planner. I opened it. And there it was in Chloe's own handwriting, the blueprint of my erasure. Sunday, brunch with grandmother, Tuesday, accompany grandmother to symphony. Thanksgiving with grandmother in Nantucket. Christmas Eve, Albright family gala. Grandmother, The parenthetical was a knife to my heart. I was no longer her grandmother. I was a variable that needed to be defined. And there, in the notes for the upcoming week, was the most chilling entry of all: strategy, phase out, gradual distance. Cite generational gap, inability to relate to current life. Minimize contact preemptively to soften eventual separation. That was me. I was a strategy. A problem to be managed and phased out like an outdated piece of software. I sank into the expensive leather desk chair, the planner open in my lap. The tears came then, hot and silent. They weren't tears of self-pity. They were tears of grief for the granddaughter I had loved, the one who had apparently died and been replaced by this cold, calculating stranger. I had been worried she was working too hard. I never imagined she was working on a plan to delete me from her life. Arthur found me there some time later, still holding the planner. He didn't say a word. He just helped me up, took the planner from my numb hands, and led me out of that beautiful, soulless apartment. As I locked the door, I felt like I was locking away the last 25 years of my life. Chapter 7. The weight of truth. I didn't leave my house for 3 days. I told Sarah I had a bad cold. The truth was, I had a broken heart, and I didn't know how to show it to her. How could I tell my daughter that her child, the center of our universe, saw us as an inconvenience? A relic from a past she was eager to shed? Arthur was my rock. He brought me groceries, made me tea, and sat with me in the silence. He had made copies of the most damning pages from the planner. You have to tell Sarah, Ellie, he said gently on the third day. She has a right to know. I know, I whispered, staring at the photo of a young Chloe on my mantelpiece. But knowing this will break her. It's breaking me. You're stronger than you think, Arthur said, patting my hand. You've survived worse. He was right. I had survived losing Thomas. But this felt different. This was a choice. A deliberate, calculated abandonment. That evening, I asked Sarah to come over. I told her it was important. I baked a lemon drizzle cake, a nervous habit. When she arrived, her face was full of concern. Mom, are you feeling better? You still look pale. Sit down, Sarah, I said, my voice quiet. We need to talk about Chloe. And then, with the copied pages of the planner on the coffee table between us, I told her everything. The visit to Viridian. Margaret Albright. The apartment. The planner. The strategy to phase out E. Sarah's face went through a journey of emotions: disbelief, confusion, anger, and finally, a devastation so profound it seemed to physically shrink her. She picked up the page with the phase-out E note, her hands shaking. E, she said, her voice a broken thing. She can't even write your name? She refers to her own Nana as E? She looked at me, her eyes swimming with tears. And me, Mom? Am I S? Is there a plan to phase me out, too? I had no answer for her. We sat there in my cozy living room, surrounded by the evidence of a happy family, and wept for the family we had just lost. Chapter 8. The confrontation. We decided to confront Chloe together. We wouldn't be angry. We would be heartbroken. We would show her the evidence and ask her simply, why? We invited her for Sunday dinner, the one she always canceled. To our surprise, she accepted. The day arrived, heavy with tension. Sarah and I moved around the kitchen, not speaking, the air thick with unsaid words. When the doorbell rang, we both jumped. Chloe came in, all bright smiles and expensive perfume. She was carrying a bouquet of flowers and a bottle of wine. Nana! Mom! Sorry I'm late, traffic was a nightmare. She kissed our cheeks. The gesture that had always felt like love now felt like a violation. We sat down to eat. The meal was a stilted, horrible pantomime of our old family dinners. Chloe chattered about work, about her trip to Aspen, about a new restaurant she'd been to with Margaret. She said the name so casually, as if daring us to react. We didn't. We waited. Finally, as I was serving the lemon drizzle cake, Sarah could take it no longer. She placed the copied page from the planner on the table. What is this, Chloe? Chloe's smile froze. Her eyes darted from the paper to Sarah's face to mine. I saw the calculation in her eyes, the same cold calculation I'd seen in Margaret's. She was deciding on her strategy. Where did you get that? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. It doesn't matter, I said, my own voice steady. What matters is what it says. Who is it, Chloe? The mask didn't so much crack as it dissolved, revealing the cold, hard ambition beneath. She leaned back in her chair, her posture defensive. So you went through my things, she said, her tone flat. I should have known you wouldn't understand. Understand what? Sarah cried, her voice cracking. Understand that you're replacing your own family with a richer, more connected version? That you're ashamed of us. It's not about shame, Mom. Chloe snapped, her composure finally breaking. It's about survival. Do you have any idea what it's like in my world? The connections you need? The image you have to project? Margaret Albright opens doors for me that you and Nana couldn't even dream of. The words hung in the air, brutal and honest. So we were holding you back? I asked, the pain so acute it was almost physical. Chloe had the decency to look momentarily ashamed, but she pressed on. It's not personal, Nana. It's business. My life is my business. Margaret understands that. She's a part of that world. You're not. You never could be. We are your family, Sarah whispered, the tears streaming down her face now. And family should want what's best for me. Chloe shot back, standing up. This is what's best for me. A life without having to explain my quaint grandmother or my middle-class mother to people who matter. A life where my grandmother is a board member and a philanthropist, not a retired librarian who bakes cookies. She looked at us, her face a mixture of defiance and something else, something that looked like relief. The secret was out. I'm sorry you found out this way, she said, picking up her purse. But this is who I am now. You can either accept it or you can't. And with that, my granddaughter walked out of my house and out of my life. The door clicked shut, and the sound was as final as a coffin lid closing. Sarah collapsed into sobs. I went to her, holding her, rocking her as I had when she was a little girl. We were all each other had now. The brilliant, shining star of our family had extinguished herself from our sky, and we were left in a cold, dark emptiness. Continue writing chapters up to 20, of course. Here are the next chapters of Nana Ellie's story. Chapter 9. The aftermath. The days that followed were shrouded in a gray, heavy grief. Sarah didn't go to work. I didn't water my roses. We moved through my house like ghosts, the silence broken only by the occasional sob or the kettle whistling for tea that would go cold. The world outside continued bright and indifferent, while our small world had collapsed inward. We didn't hear from Chloe. No calls, no texts, no frantic apologies. Her silence was more confirmation than any document could ever be. She had made her choice. Arthur checked on us daily, a steady, quiet presence. He didn't offer platitudes. He just fixed the leaky faucet, mowed the lawn, and sat with us, his silent solidarity a small anchor in our storm. It was Sarah who broke first, her mother's heart refusing to accept the finality. Maybe she's just confused, Mom. Maybe she'll come to her senses. I looked at my daughter, her face etched with a hope that was too painful to bear. I knew in my bones that the Chloe we knew was gone. The woman who had sat at my table was a different creature. One forged in ambition and a hunger for a world we couldn't give her. Sarah, my dear, I said, taking her hand. It was cold. We have to let her go. The words felt like a betrayal, but they were the truth. To keep hoping was to keep the wound open. Chapter 10. The box of memories. A week after the confrontation, I did something I had been putting off. I went up to the attic. In a corner under an old quilt was a large cardboard box labeled Chloe, in my late husband's handwriting. I brought it down to the living room. Sarah watched, her eyes wide and wounded as I opened it. Inside was a museum of a lost life. Report cards with gold stars. Faded finger paintings. The program from her third-grade ballet recital. Every card she'd ever given me for Mother's Day or my birthday. To the best Nana in the world. I love you more than all the stars. You're my best friend. I picked up a small lumpy clay ashtray she'd made me in art class. Thomas didn't smoke, but he'd kept it on his desk until the day he died. Each object was a shard of the past, beautiful and sharp. We can't keep this, I said to Sarah, my voice thick. What? Mom, no. These are her things. They're our memories. These are memories of a little girl who doesn't exist anymore, I said gently. Keeping this box is like keeping a shrine. It will only hurt us. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But we did it. We didn't throw the box away. We sealed it up and asked Arthur to take it to a storage unit. Out of sight but not gone. A part of me, the sentimental old woman, couldn't bear to let it go completely. But the part of me that needed to survive knew it couldn't stay in the house. Chapter 11. The first crack in their world. While Sarah and I were grieving Arthur, the retired investigator, was working. He believed the best defense was a good understanding of your opponent's weaknesses. People like this, he said, meaning Chloe and Margaret, they build their castles on sand. They think because it's shiny, it's strong. He had been digging deeper into the financial relationship between Chloe and Margaret Albright. What he found was interesting. The penthouse wasn't a gift. It was technically a loan from the Viridian Dynamics Foundation, the charitable arm that Margaret chaired. A loan with very favorable, arguably illegal, terms for a CEO. See this? Arthur said, pointing to a complex document on my computer screen. This is a conflict of interest. Chloe is essentially receiving a massive personal benefit from a foundation she, as CEO, has influence over. The other board members might not know about this. He also found that several of Margaret's pet charities had received unusually large donations from Viridian in the last 2 years, donations that Chloe had authorized. It's a circle, Arthur explained. Margaret gives Chloe status and luxury. Chloe gives Margaret's causes company money. They're propping each other up. It wasn't about revenge for me. It was about understanding the architecture of the lie. But for the first time, I saw a flicker of something other than pain in Sarah's eyes. It was anger. Chapter 12. The uninvited guest. The annual Viridian Dynamics Shareholders Meeting was a black tie gala, an event covered by the society pages. It was the kind of thing Chloe had always told me was stuffy and boring. This year I decided to see for myself. With Arthur's help, I got a ticket. Sarah, still too raw, couldn't bring herself to go. So I went alone. I wore my best dress, a simple navy blue sheath I'd owned for a decade. I didn't look like the other guests with their diamonds and designer gowns, but I carried myself with the dignity of 70 years of life. The ballroom was a glittering sea of wealth and power. And there on a raised dais was Chloe. She was radiant, commanding, speaking into a microphone about quarterly earnings and future growth. And seated in the place of honor beside her, beaming like a queen mother, was Margaret Albright. I stood at the back of the room unseen. I watched them. I saw the way Margaret would lean over and whisper something to Chloe, the intimate, possessive gestures. I saw the way the crowd looked at them, not just as a CEO and a board member but as a unit. A dynasty. Then during the Q&A I raised my hand. An attendant brought me a microphone. Chloe, scanning the crowd, froze when she saw me. Her smile didn't falter, but it became fixed, a mask of terror. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Ms. Williams," I said, my voice clear and steady in the hushed room. "My question is about corporate governance. Could you clarify the company's policy on conflicts of interest, specifically regarding loans or gifts from the Viridian Foundation to its senior executives?" The room went utterly silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Chloe stared at me, her face pale. She was utterly unprepared. Margaret, however, was not. She smoothly took the microphone from Chloe's frozen hand. "That's an excellent question," she said, her voice dripping with condescending charm. "And one that highlights the robust, transparent policies we have in place. All such transactions are fully disclosed and approved by the full board. We appreciate your concern." She looked at me as if I were a mildly interesting insect. But the damage was done. I had planted a seed of doubt in a room full of people whose only God was profit. I saw several shareholders exchange glances. I had taken their perfect, shiny world and shown them a crack. I didn't wait for the end. I handed the microphone back and walked out, my head held high. I had faced the dragon in its den, and I had not been burned. Chapter 13. The reckoning. The fallout was swift. My question, asked by a little old lady who clearly wasn't a typical shareholder, became a minor scandal. Business journalists, always hungry for a story, started digging. Arthur anonymously fed them the documents he had gathered. Within a week, the story was in the financial press. Viridian CEO under scrutiny for foundation dealings. The board was forced to announce an internal review. Chloe didn't call us. But Sarah's phone rang. It was Margaret Albright. Sarah put her on speakerphone. "You need to control your mother." Margaret's voice was icy, devoid of its usual society page warmth. "Her little stunt is causing significant problems." "My mother is a grown woman who can make her own choices," Sarah replied, her voice shaking but firm. "Perhaps you should have thought about the problems before you convinced my daughter to disown her family." "There was no convincing necessary," Margaret sneered. "Chloe wanted a life of significance. You and your mother represent everything she was trying to escape." Mediocrity. The word hung in the air. It was the final ugly truth. "We don't want anything from you or from Chloe," I said, speaking into the phone. "But we will not be silent while you two play your games with a publicly traded company. There are rules." Margaret hung up. The call was over, but the war was just beginning. Chapter 14. The visit. 2 days later, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Chloe standing there. She looked tired, stripped of her corporate armor. She was wearing jeans and a sweater, looking more like the girl I remembered. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice small. I stepped aside. She walked into the living room, her eyes taking in the familiar space as if she were a stranger. "Why, Nana?" she asked, turning to me, her eyes pleading. "Why would you try to destroy everything I've built?" "I didn't destroy anything, Chloe," I said calmly. "I simply asked a question in a public forum. If what you've built is so strong, one question from an old woman shouldn't be able to harm it. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The scrutiny. I understand that you lied to us," I said. "I understand that you were ashamed of us. I understand that you were planning to throw us away like yesterday's newspaper. That I understand perfectly." Tears filled her eyes. "It wasn't like that. It was complicated. Margaret offered me a way up. A way to be someone." "You were always someone, Chloe," I said, my own heart breaking all over again. "You were my granddaughter. That was enough for me." "It clearly wasn't enough for you." She didn't deny it. She just stood there, crying in my living room, a lost woman in the ruins of the life she had chosen. I could lose my job, Nana. The board is furious. Then perhaps you should have thought about that before you crossed ethical lines for a woman who calls your own flesh and blood mediocre. Her head snapped up. She said that. She did. To your mother. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, doubt perhaps. The first crack in her devotion to Margaret. She left soon after with no resolution, no apology. But she had come. And that in itself was something. Chapter 15. The board's verdict. The internal review took a month. Arthur kept us updated through his contacts. The evidence was too clear, too damning. The loan for the penthouse was deemed an improper benefit. The donations to Margaret's charities, while not illegal, showed a pattern of poor judgment and a clear conflict of interest. Chloe was not fired. She was too valuable to the company's stock price. But she was censured. Her authority was severely curtailed. She was stripped of her seat on the foundation's board, and a new chief operating officer was appointed to oversee all major financial decisions. She was CEO in name only. Margaret Albright was forced to resign from the board entirely. It was a victory of a sort, but it felt hollow. We had clipped their wings, but we hadn't gotten our granddaughter back. Chapter 16. A new rhythm. Slowly, painfully, Sarah and I began to build a new life. A life without Chloe in it. It was like learning to walk with a limp. You never forget the injury, but you learn to move forward despite it. Sarah started volunteering at an animal shelter, finding solace in the unconditional love of creatures who knew nothing of betrayal. I went back to my garden, my knitting circle, my book club. I found a strange kind of peace in the simple, honest routines of my life. Arthur became a more permanent fixture. He and I started having dinner together every Friday night. It wasn't a romance, I was too old for that, and my heart still belonged to Thomas. But it was companionship. It was comfort. One Friday over meatloaf he said, "You know, Ellie, you're the strongest person I know." I smiled. "I don't feel strong, Arthur. I just feel old and tired." "Strong isn't about not feeling pain," he said. "It's about getting up every day and putting the kettle on, even when your heart is broken. That's the strongest thing there is." Chapter 17. The letter. Almost a year to the day after the confrontation, a letter arrived for me. It was on expensive, heavy stationery. The return address was Margaret Albright's. I opened it with trembling hands. "But I want you to know that what I offered Chloe was real. I offered her a world of beauty and influence. You offered her cookies. I wonder, in the end, which was the greater kindness. M. Albright." I read the letter twice. There was no remorse. Only a cold, arrogant justification. She still believed she was the victim. She still believed she was superior. I didn't show the letter to Sarah. I simply put it in the fireplace and watched it burn. Margaret Albright had taken enough from me. I wouldn't let her have any more space in my mind. Chapter 18. The phone call. Winter came again. The house was decorated for Christmas, but the festive spirit felt forced. On a cold December evening, the phone rang. It was Chloe. Her voice was different, softer. The sharp corporate edge was gone. "Nana," she said. I was wondering if I could come over." My heart, that old battered organ, gave a painful lurch. "Why, Chloe?" There was a long pause. I miss your lemon drizzle cake." It was such a small, childish thing to say. But it was the first real human thing she had said to me in over a year. "All right," I said, my voice cautious. "You can come over." Chapter 19. The prodigal granddaughter. When she arrived, she looked like a ghost of her former self. Not the powerful CEO. Not the lost woman who had cried in my living room, but someone else. Someone quieter. She'd lost weight. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by a simple coat. She sat at my kitchen table just like old times. I served her a slice of cake and a cup of tea. She ate it slowly, savoring it. "It's over with Margaret," she said finally, not looking at me. "Completely. She wasn't who I thought she was. When things got difficult, she blamed me for everything." I said nothing. I just let her talk. I lost everything, Nana, she whispered, tears dripping into her tea. My power at the company. My other life. The friends I had there were Margaret's friends. They're gone too. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. No one deserved that kind of utter devastation. I was such a fool, she cried, her shoulders shaking. I traded the only people who ever truly loved me for a fantasy. I thought I was building an empire, but it was all just a house of cards. And you were the only one who was real. She looked at me then, her eyes full of a raw, desperate hope. Can you ever forgive me? I looked at my granddaughter, the brilliant, ambitious, deeply flawed woman she had become, the little girl I had loved with all my heart. They were the same person. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip, Chloe, I said gently. It's a path you walk. And it's a long one. The trust is broken. That will take a very long time to mend if it ever can. Her face fell, but she nodded, accepting the hard truth. But, I said, reaching across the table and placing my wrinkled hand over hers, you are my granddaughter. And this is your home. You can always come home. It wasn't the happy ending from a storybook. It was messy and painful and complicated. But it was a start. Chapter 20. A different kind of peace. Chloe didn't move back in. She got a small apartment and a job as a consultant, away from the glaring spotlight of a CEO position. She started coming for Sunday dinners again. The conversations were stilted at first, filled with landmines of past hurts. Sarah was wary, her mother's heart still heavily armored. But we kept trying. Some weeks were good. Some were hard. Chloe was learning humility, a painful lesson for someone who had been so high on her own ambition. One spring afternoon, I was in my garden, pruning my roses. Chloe was there, sitting on the bench Thomas had built, watching me. You know, Nana, she said quietly, for the first time in years, I'm not trying to be someone else. I'm just me. And it's enough. I looked at her, the sun catching the hints of gold in her hair, and I saw a glimpse of the girl she used to be. She was scarred, and so were we. Our family was a mended vase, the cracks still visible, never to be what it was. But it was whole again in its own fragile way. The love hadn't died. It had been tempered in a fire of betrayal, and had emerged different, more cautious, more precious. I went back to my pruning. The roses were coming back beautifully after the long winter. They always did. There was a lesson in that, I thought. As long as the roots are strong, there is always a chance for new growth. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt a sense of peace. Not the ignorant peace of before, but a peace that had been earned. A peace that knew the weight of sorrow, and valued the quiet joy of a sunny afternoon in the garden all the more because of it. My story had reached its end, not with a bang, but with the soft, hopeful sound of new beginnings.